The oldest and strongest human emotion is fear, and the oldest and strongest type of fear is trepidation of the unknown. When we were children, our parents told us that monsters didn't exist, but we were sure that something was lurking under the bed or in the closet. Fear sees, even if our eyes are closed. Welcome to the realm of the arcane. My name is Lon Strickler. Join me as I examine unexplained creatures, strange manifestations, and remarkable realities. Imagine this next hour as a voyage of discovery to strange lands, seeking not for new territory, but for new knowledge of the supernatural. Come on board as we begin this adventure together. Hey folks, good evening and welcome to another episode of Arcane Radio, where we explore the unexplained here on the Paranormal King Radio Network. I'm your host, Lon Strickler, coming to you with a cannon shot of historic Gettysburg in the cryptid Mecca of Pennsylvania. I thank you for joining me. Now, before I introduce our guest, I want to mention that during the past week, the Phantoms of Monsters 14 research team has once again been made aware of two more winged humanoid encounter reports near Chicago's O'Hare International. And that makes a total of 4 reports in 3 weeks, originating from the same general area northeast of the airport. Now, like I stated previously, there has been a recent uptick of sightings in the Chicagoland area, so make sure you check the blog daily for all updates. Now, I recently received a telephone call from a gentleman I'll call EK in reference to a multiple Bigfoot sighting he had in mid-August 2019. He was in the process of helping a friend move from Tennessee to Perry County, Missouri. Now, when they reached their destination, the new residence was in a rural section of Perry County, Missouri. It was approximately 6:30 a.m. local time. The dawn light was just beginning to creep through. The house was near a neighbor's larger house, which had a corral with horses behind it. Now, EK was beginning to unload furniture, and when his friend pointed in the direction of the corral and mentioned that there was movement in the woods behind it. Now, EK paused and looked in the direction of the corral. He noticed the movement as well, but was unsure what he was looking at. Now, he began to walk towards the corral while remaining on his friend's property. He continued to watch as the morning light became brighter. He distinctly observed 4 hairy conical heads and shoulders bobbing up along the edge of the woods. Now, the horses acted somewhat mindful of the activity, but did not act afraid, and EK was surprised at how quickly these beings were moving about. Now, he told me that he watched the movement for about 20 to 30 minutes, but was unable to get a decent photograph. Now, he was positive that he was properly focusing on the heads and shoulders, which were the only parts visible, but nothing discernible was in the images. There was distinctive grunts and heavy breathing coming from the direction of this Bigfoot group. Now, he has been a Bigfoot enthusiast for many years and is positive that these were Bigfoot. Even though he has never investigated the phenomena, he believes that this was a family group consisting of a large male, a smaller female, and possibly 2 juveniles. Now, EK was very excited about what he had seen and is searching for a way to prove what he had witnessed. I offered my assistance, and hopefully he'll be able to gather photographic evidence in the future. Now, he is mindful that full disclosure of the location would be somewhat detrimental to these Bigfoot and has no intention of causing these creatures any harm. So that was an interesting account. I actually just received that last night. So let's go ahead and get started with the show. Tonight I'll welcome Alaska Bigfoot researcher Larry Beans Baxter to Arcane Radio. Now, born in Kentucky, Larry is a military and law enforcement veteran with a passion for investigating the unexplained. Beans joined the military in his 20s and was stationed in Alaska. Beans fell in love with Alaska and made it his own. Living in Alaska, Beans has spent several years investigating the Bigfoot phenomena, as well as the abandoned town of Port Chatham, Alaska. He is a member of the Kenai Bigfoot Research Group. So, Beans, thanks for joining me this evening.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Lon. I appreciate it.
So, I got a chance today to watch a film you were in. I think was probably shot back in 2018 of this Port Chatham phenomena. And can you kind of tell us the story about what had been supposedly going on there?
Yeah, well, Port Chatham has a really interesting history here in Alaska. There were two communities there. It's located on the southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula, kind of in south central Alaska. And there were two communities there, one called Portlock, which was named for Captain Nathaniel Portlock with the British Navy, and then Port Chatham, which was named for the area, Port Chatham. And there's a lot of history there with resources. Most people, if you look up Port Chatham, you'll hear about the cannery that was there, the fish cannery. But there was a lot of other stuff going on there that people don't really know about. There was a chromite mine there that produced a lot of chromite for the World War I. There was also a coal mine there and a bunch of little sawmills that harvested the lumber around the area. So the area is really rich in natural resources, and not just the fish there that they were harvesting for the cannery. And so naturally, people moved in there and they started collecting the natural resources. They opened up a cannery, and probably in about the early 1900s, people started realizing that something wasn't right. Most of the workers at the cannery were local Aleut natives, and they noticed things were not right. They were going into the woods to hunt. People were disappearing. And in 1905, the cannery workers just kind of threw their hands up and said, "We're not doing this anymore. It's not safe." And they basically quit. They went on strike, and the owners of the cannery, they finally relented and hired armed guards to guard the cannery and the workers, to keep them safe from what the natives call a Nantinak. There's not really a good translation from the native language to English for what the Nantinak means. Most of the nearest translation is big hairy thing or hairy man-like thing. So they hired some armed guards. The workers came back, and things were okay for a few years. And again, in the 1930s, people began to disappear again. There was a gentleman named Andrew Camlock. He ran a little lumber or sawmill. He had a little lumberjack operation going on. He disappeared. They went up into the woods to look for him, found him dead. He was, killed by a large piece of machinery that they said that a human couldn't lift. And the people were scared. So, they chalked this up to the Nantinak creature. There's other things in the woods there as well. There's plenty of moose and bear. It is Alaska. But just, the manner that these people were killed and the things that were being, 50-gallon drums were being, tossed around. And people were convinced it was the Nantinak, and they were scared. So eventually, after enough people disappeared, the town got together and they just decided they were going to leave. So I think it was 1950, the last resident was a postmaster. And he packed up and left in 1950, and that was it. The town was just left to be abandoned. They left all the cannery equipment there. There's houses that are still standing, not too many, but a few. And they just left it to the elements. And if you go there now, you can see pieces of the cannery are starting to fall off the cliffs from the erosion. And you can just see the pieces of machinery littered along the beach. It's actually pretty cool. It's pretty surreal. And it's an amazing place. I've never seen anything like it, to see a place that was once basically a hub of natural resources production just to be left. And, that's not something you see a whole lot, in human history. With mines and stuff, you'll see ghost towns for mines, because the mine will play out and people leave because there's no more resources. But, with the fish, they never went anywhere. The cannery should still be going today. And this is one of the few times in human history where you can look and say that, progress was pushed back, that, the people were scared out of there, and, people still avoid it today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you were involved with the production with Extreme Expeditions. Stephen T. Major, he produced In Search of the Port Chatham Hairy Man. And I watched that film today, and it's interesting. It's quite interesting. Do you have any idea of any other serious investigations in the area previous to when you guys were there?
No, and there's a few good reasons for that, Lon. One, it's hard to get to Alaska. It's kind of expensive. You got to get on a plane and fly up here. And then once you get to Alaska, you got to get to Port Chatham. Now, this is an interesting fact. From where I'm sitting right now talking to you, I am about 44 air miles from Port Chatham. It's like 40 miles away. It's not far at all. But to get there, it would probably cost me a couple $1,000 because I'd have to charter a boat to go there. Nobody wants to go there. I got to find a boat captain that's willing to go in there and take me there. So it's not a place that's easy to get to. It takes a lot of resources and planning to get there.
Mm. Yeah, I kind of figured that out by watching the film. I mean, it was like a 6-hour ride on a boat. So you had to cross a lot of water to get just 40 miles from you.
Yeah, and a lot of people that are critical of the film are like, well, why didn't they do this, or why didn't they take that, or why didn't they, do this or that? And you got to understand, we were, limited with our time to be there, because literally time was money, because we had to pay for the boat to be there. And two, we were limited pretty much by what we could carry. We couldn't take a whole lot of heavy stuff in there. So
right.
It was the best we could do with what we had, and it was the first, as far as I know, Bigfoot research that was done on the ground there.
Well, the thing that impressed me most of all was everybody that would watch this would get a very good idea of the terrain, for one thing. It's very thick. Now, you got, I don't know what kind of pines those are that are in there, but they have low branches, and they've got to be a pain to get through. And you got very thick moss on the ground that seems to shift every time you walk on it. It does seem very inhospitable for anybody, let alone the people that had lived there at one time. Yeah,
and it's been sitting there since 1950, so it's nature's. I'm sure at one point they probably had trails and roads, and not necessarily paved ones, but they had pathways and stuff, and all that's all grown up now. And the terrain is it's primordial. I can't. It's like something out of Jurassic Park, and that was one of the problems that we ran into, especially in some of the areas we were at, because the ground was so soft and spongy that it didn't really lend itself to tracking very well. We did see a few impressions that were pretty impressive, but we couldn't really cast them just because it was in that spongy moss. So it was kind of a disappointment to me to find. I found a really nice 14-inch track, and I could not photograph it the way I want. I cannot tell you or show you how awesome that imprint was, because just from every angle I was photographing it from, I couldn't get it to show up. I was using all the tricks I knew. I'm trying to use like oblique lighting to get it to show up, and it was something. It was one of the few times I've ever looked down at the ground and went like, holy, curse word. That was impressive.
Yeah, you had to been lucky enough to find a mud hole somewhere, because there weren't many there, and I did happen to see the photograph. I think you got 3 very distinct toe impressions, but it did seem like a pretty good sized human-like foot.
Yeah, and that was the area where we heard a lot of movement, and like you pointed out, the brush was so thick we could have had something just a few feet from us and we would have never known it. But,
absolutely.
There were several times where we would walk around a bend or something, and we would just hear just ahead of us, just far enough to where we couldn't see. We'd hear a thump, something running away, a thump, 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 and we couldn't really tell if it was bipedal or not. We did see some signs of bear and other animals, but in my experience, bears don't, they don't make a thumping sound like that when they run away. They're pretty light on their feet, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that myself. I've seen plenty of bears run off, and it's very rare to hear them, even in a dry woods. You just don't hear a lot of it. They do seem to be kind of light on their feet, like a cushion under the feet when they're running. So in that environment with that spongy ground, I can imagine it'd be very difficult to hear them. You'd have to have a lot of weight forcing down for you to hear something running off. Now, I mean, speaking of that, in that one area that you were in at the end of the first day, where you caught the flare of something that looked humanoid, I tell you, I've seen a lot of flare of Bigfoot, or supposed Bigfoot. And I think that's probably one of the best ones I've seen, because this thing had the right shape to it. It was bipedal, and this thing was raising its arms above its head and moving away. So I don't know. I really do believe you did capture one.
Yeah, and hindsight is 20/20, and curse of Sasquatch and all that. I actually got a lot better look at it in the FLIR than what you see on the video. I actually watched it for several seconds before I finally was like, oh, I got to hit record. But the best I could describe it as is it looked like Donkey Kong. From the video game, it looked like Donkey Kong was standing there, just lifting his hands up and down, or his arms up and down over his head. And I thought, that's weird. And I think just about everybody that went with us saw it, because we're sitting there passing the FLIR around like, what the hell is that? And I finally hit the record button, but it seemed like it was moving away from us. I don't think it liked us being there. And it seemed to be moving away from us, and we tried to catch up with it, but you'll have to watch the movie to see what happens.
Yeah, and another phenomenon I thought was very interesting was the area has a lot of wild blueberry bushes the whole way through it, from what I could see on the film. And you guys made note of, it seemed that one part, the blueberries were eaten off the bushes, and you got a lot of bears in the area. But it seems like the other part, I mean, all the berries are still on the bushes. And, it has to make you think, well, maybe these bears aren't going over the other side for a reason. Maybe there's a territorial delineation or something. I mean, they stay out in their own territory.
Exactly, Lon. It was almost like there was an invisible partition through that part of the woods, where on one side, there was lots of bear scat, lots of bear sign, and just these stripped berry bushes that had been pretty much picked clean. There'd be a berry here or there. And then on the other side, there was no bear scat, no bear sign or anything, and the bushes were just full and berries just dropping off of them. And I think, I wasn't the only one that got the impression that maybe there was an invisible barrier there, that, that maybe those full bushes belonged to somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting film. I mean, there are a few things that come up in it that really make you think. I mean, overall, what was your impression of it? Did you learn much from it? Is it something that you're going to be able to use in further research?
Well, I think the most important thing I learned from it was just how rugged the terrain is over there. And, I want to go back over there eventually and do some more research. But, that initial trip over there just really taught me just how rough it's going to be. And, I'm going to have to get in better shape for one thing. And I'm going to have to just, I'm just going to have to take some better equipment and just be prepared for that terrain. Cause I hadn't been there. Actually, none of us had been there. So we weren't quite sure what to expect. So getting there and just getting boots on the ground and seeing what it was like and what we got to contend with, was probably the biggest learning experience for me. And I can't wait to get back over there and look around some more and hopefully get a better sighting. Not very many people go there. So I think the Bigfoot that are over there probably aren't too used to humans. So I think probably got a pretty good chance of having a sighting over there. Mm.
Yeah, let alone the bears and the moose. And I'll tell you, I've had an encounter with a moose, and that is not fun. They are quite amazing and huge animals, and they don't have a fondness for people. So you really take your chances going there. And of course, you guys were really armed to the teeth. I mean, and I can't blame you.
Yeah, when it comes to the whole pro kill, no kill thing, I'm pro kill, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to be the one that does it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's going to take a body to prove it. But at the same time, I don't think I would shoot one unless it was threatening toward me. It was self-defense.
Yeah.
But yeah, we got a lot more than just Bigfoot to worry about up here. There's almost every year we have at least one or two bear maulings. There's been several on the peninsula here where I live. So, it's just better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. So I was tasked with security for the expedition because, I've been in the military and I work in law enforcement. So I wanted to be able to handle, whatever threat that we faced. So we had, a shotgun with some pretty good slugs in it and, my 44 Magnum. So, that's just the reality of it here in Alaska. There's things here that will kill you if they can.
Right. So, what got you into Bigfoot?
Well, I've always been into it ever since I was a little kid. I can't point to one specific thing or incident that, got me into it. I used to remember the Weekly World News, that newspaper with
yeah.
When I was a kid, my mom would buy that at the checkout stand and I would read the articles in there and I'd clip them out and keep them. And, I was really into like Ghostbusters and stuff when I was a kid. So I've always been, interested in the paranormal and drawn toward that. And Bigfoot was kind of an extension of that. And living up here in Alaska, it was almost just like a natural, what can I investigate up here? And Bigfoot seemed to be the natural choice. And it was always something that I kind of thought like, well, I'll do it when I retire, I'll do it when I got nothing but time. And I kind of decided a couple of years ago that, I better start now because you're not always around to do the things you want to do. And it was something I really wanted to do. So I figured I better do it while the doing was good. So I kind of come out of the Bigfoot closet and kind of started to do research up here and, in a more public light. So yeah, it's just something I've always been drawn to. I can't really point to one incident, though.
Have you had any interesting encounters?
Yeah, I've had a few. Really, the first thing, I think was it 2000? I can't remember the year. It might have been 2014 or so. I went to an area where there had been some encounters, not Port Chatham, but it was here on the Kenai Peninsula. And I found a pretty decent track. And I thought, man, I gotta come back and check this place out some more. And I went back there a couple of months later, and my wife was with me for this one, and we were in about the same area where I found the track. And again, we heard this like thump, thump, thump. Something was running away from us, and we couldn't figure out what it was. I went looking for it. There was no bear scat, no moose scat in the area, and because I'd found that track there, earlier, I think that probably that was an area that there was a Bigfoot living. And I've went back there several times and haven't had anything else happen. But I think here in Alaska, your best chance of having a sighting or encounter is probably like late spring or early fall. I don't think they're around a lot in the summertime when the tourists are around. I think they go to ground in the tourist season, and then they come out when the tourists leave. It sounds kind of funny, but it's true. People come down here. They call the Kenai Peninsula Alaska's playground.
Right.
Because people come down here to recreate, and they're in the woods and they're on the water and they're having fun. And I think it drives the shy wildlife away. So those were probably the two that kind of got me into this, thinking, hey, there's something here, in Alaska that I can actually sink my teeth into and do something with. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what started it off for me here in Alaska.
I mean, I've heard a lot of stories about the Kenai Peninsula and the Bigfoot encounters. I mean, I've even heard stories about people being taken by these creatures. But what's the most interesting story that you've heard that you can tell us?
Oh, geez. I love almost the whole history of Port Chatham. But the one that probably interests me the most is the one I was talking about earlier, Mr. Andrew Camlock, that the guy that died when he got hit by the piece of machinery. I did a lot of research into that. And even though it happened in the 1930s, I thought, here's I do a lot of investigations in my job. So I thought, this is something, I've got a name, I've got a date. This is something I can work with. So I got into the state records, and I was trying to find the death certificate for Mr. Camlock, because if I could find a cause of death, then that would go a long way to proving the story. So I did quite a bit of research. I actually had somebody at the state records office, looking things up for me. It's in Juneau, so it's actually quite a ways away. And I wasn't able to find his death certificate, and I think that's probably because, a lot of this happened before statehood, so there wasn't a lot of good record keeping going on. But I did find a death certificate for Andrew Camlock's son, who died some years later, and Andrew's name was listed on his son's death certificate as his father. So there was a gentleman named Andrew Camlock that was alive in the 1930s that could have been killed by the Nantinaq. So that was exciting for me, was to find that. I don't want to call it proof, but to find that validation that there's some truth to that story, that gentleman did exist, because there's not a lot of names attached to these stories about Port Chatham. They just say, well, hunters went into the woods and they died. And there's not a whole lot you can do with that as far as research goes. But finding out that Mr. Camlock existed was a big deal to me, and it makes it one of my favorite stories because there's actually something there that you can find.
Mm-hmm. Can you kind of give us a roundabout figure, the death toll at Port Chatham?
Well, from what I understand, we've got Mr. Camlock, that's one, and the hunters are referred to in plural, so I can only assume it was probably, more than a couple. So, the best I can, without that much more information I can go with is probably between, 2 and 5 for sure. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, down here in the 48, you don't hear much about, or if anything, about Bigfoot attacks. There are occasionally some, but it does seem that, especially the indigenous stories, that there are definitely attacks up there in Alaska, and I think some areas of northern Canada as well. Yeah,
there's a native people here named the Kenaitze, and they have a creature. They're very, they live on the peninsula as well, and they have a creature they call the Nantinaq, which it's very similar to Nantinaq. It's just Nantinaq, and the translation for that is the one who steals us, and that's pretty creepy.
So you have heard of kidnappings by these things?
Yeah, there's a very famous story. I believe it was in Alaska Magazine of the bush pilot who got married and was flying from Anchorage to another part of the state with his bride. The weather got rough. They put down somewhere on a sandbar near a river, and he was putting up the tent, and his wife started screaming, and he turns around to see her being carried off by this big beast on 2 feet running off, and he gave chase and couldn't find him. And yeah, I haven't found any solid documentation or police report on that, but that's a pretty popular story that makes the rounds up here.
Mm. Now, the morphology of Bigfoot, Sasquatch, or whatever you want to call them, is it much different than what we have down here in the lower 48?
There doesn't seem to be a lot of difference. I've heard of, black colored ones, the red colored ones, and, even I haven't heard of any white ones though, like Yeti colored. So
yeah,
I think it's probably pretty similar. I think that one thing I can't figure out is how they survive the winters. I guess if moose and bear can, then, I guess Bigfoot can as well, but it just amazes me that something like that can survive in weather and like that we have up here and not just die of exposure, especially since they have fingers and toes. Why don't they get frostbite?
Absolutely. I mean, and I've thought about that myself. It's not like they have a lot of fat stored on them from what people have said they've seen. They have a coat of hair to a degree, but Alaskan winters are pretty tough on, and of course other animals, indigenous animals, bear, moose, or whatever, they've all got layers of fat that protect them basically. So it is interesting that you're right about the frostbite. That is interesting.
Yeah, I do have a little, just a theory. I don't really have anything to substantiate it, but I think that they must have a denser muscle system or something, because you hear about all these stories about people taking shots at them and they just run off. And I know I hit it, and there's no blood or anything. So I think they must have, if they've got denser muscles, that would almost act like a natural Kevlar, and disperse the force of bullets that hit them. So I think that, I guess it's as good a theory as anything else,
Yeah. Yeah, we hear that too, but I don't know. I don't know. I personally believe, in particularly some areas here in the lower 48, that there's a supernatural aspect to these creatures. But I think up where you are, these things they're indigenous flesh and blood beings. I'm quite sure of that.
Yeah, when I first got into this, I thought for sure they were, flesh and blood, and I still do. But when I was down in Washington recently, I had some things happen to me there. I kind of made me question that, and I try to keep an open mind, but at the same time, I don't want to just completely just start. What do they say? You can't answer. A question with a question, like what are they? And so I think that until I see one, cloak or dematerialize or pop out of a portal, that I'm still going to be a pretty firm flesh and blood guy.
Well, I've talked to a lot of people over the years, and I know a lot of them that are much more open-minded than they used to be, frankly, because they never find a body. They're just so elusive. And I've actually talked to people that had been tracking these things, and they just suddenly disappear on them. I mean, and there's no rhyme or reason how they can just disappear in the terrain that they're actually in. I mean, that specific terrain. So I don't know. I think there's a connection between a lot of different things when it comes to cryptids, but I guess until we really prove it, we're left to imagine what it very well may be.
Yeah, and I didn't really mention with Port Chatham, there's other things going on there as well. They had the Dark Lady. Did I tell you about that?
Yeah, go ahead and tell me about that.
So
I heard it mentioned in the movie, but I didn't really know what it was.
Yeah, so there's a legend that there's a lady that comes out of the cliffs and walks around on the beach in a dark or a black dress, and the dress like flows behind her and drags on the beach, and she kind of floats around, and goes back into the cliffs, and they call her the Dark Lady. Well, there's also, this is probably my favorite non-Bigfoot story out of Port Chatham. There was a story of a gentleman who came into to Port Chatham one day, and he was tying his boat up at the dock, and he was walking down the dock to go to the town, and he passed a group of native children sitting on the edge of the dock, and he walked past them, and he thought, man, that was kind of weird, because this is back in the 30s and 40s when, back when people said, sir and ma'am, and kids respected their elders, and he walked past those kids. They didn't say nothing to him. He thought, man, that's kind of weird. And he turned back around to look at them, and they were gone.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a little bit more going on in Port Chatham than just Bigfoot.
Yeah. And, I imagine when you were there, you probably got that instinct or that funny feeling that there's a lot more going on around here than just Bigfoot running around.
Yeah. And, I've thought about it quite a bit, Lon, and I think, if you're familiar with Skinwalker Ranch,
right,
and that story, remember when they moved into the ranch for the first time, the previous owners said, well, whatever you do, don't dig. And remember when I was talking about Port Chatham, there was a chromite mine and a coal mine right there.
Mm-hmm.
So it almost makes me wonder if the mining and the taking of the resources out of the ground might have had something to do with it.
It's possible. I mean, chromite, that's pretty dangerous stuff. There had to be some problems with that, you would think. I don't know. I mean, maybe nature fights back or whatever.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking, is maybe these kind of events is kind of nature's immune system, or nature's way of saying, don't do that.
Mm. So what do you believe is the future of Bigfoot in Alaska? Do you think it's going to become something, more people are going to get involved in investigating these vast areas? I mean, what comes to your head? What makes you, what do you think about it?
I think, with a lot of things, Alaska is the final frontier, or the last frontier. And I think probably it's the same with Bigfooting. It's hard to get up here, and it's hard, it's expensive to live here. So, there's not going to be a lot of people coming up here to do just that. There may be some people that already live here that get interested in it and get into it, but I don't see a lot of people, coming up here to do just that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's understandable. I know it is expensive to live up there.
Yeah. People don't realize how massive it is either.
Oh.
Alaska is huge, and it always cracks me up. Something will happen. There'll be a volcano eruption or a forest fire, and I'll have family from Kentucky call me and ask me, "Are you okay? Are you all right?" And I'm like, that is so far away from me. It doesn't even matter. I said that would be like me calling you in Kentucky and asking you if you're safe from the hurricane in Florida.
Yeah, it is a huge state. I mean, what do you have planned in the future as far as? I mean, I think you did mention to me that you are involved in another production. Do you have any plans to write or do anything else as far as your research?
I am working on a book on Port Chatham. I don't have a timeline really for it. It's started, but it's pretty, the research in that is pretty labor intensive, just because it's hard to find the records and they're so old and scattered. So I do have a book on Port Chatham coming eventually.
Mm.
I do have a couple of productions coming up. Just recently, I mentioned I was in Washington. I was back down there with Extreme Expeditions. We did some filming in a place called Stevens County down there with Bigfoot of Stevens County. Sometime, I think it's coming out early next year or maybe spring of next year. There's a documentary called Bigfoot Encounters in the Pacific Northwest that's coming out. We've already filmed that, or at least the first part of that. And then I believe on the 3rd of this month, there's a show premiering on the Travel Channel called The Alaska Triangle. There's an episode of that where Adam Davies, Stephen Major, and myself actually took a film crew over to Port Chatham. So there's going to be some more Port Chatham action there. I'm not sure what date that episode is going to air, but I think it might actually be the last episode of the series. It's like a 10-episode series. So that's coming out sometime next month.
Interesting. I'm definitely going to watch it because I tell you, the stories and phenomena that come out of Alaska really fascinate me. I know when Ken Gerhardt and the other two gentlemen were involved with that show, Missing in Alaska, I think the name of it was. That was some pretty interesting things. And I know he had some issues when he was up there. He broke his ankle in one episode, and he told me that the other episode when they thought they were actually being stalked by Bigfoot, and I think that was on the Kenai Peninsula. It seemed to me like, there's a lot going on up there. It is very interesting to watch.
Yeah, Alaska's a dangerous place. There's a funny cartoon done by a guy that is from Alaska. It's called Tundra, and he has a little cartoon where these tourists are coming out of a bus, and they're like running up to bears and taking pictures of the bears, and it says Alaska, step off the bus and into the food chain.
Yeah, exactly. So when you do investigations, do you ever get the indigenous people involved with it?
I've reached out to a couple of the local tribes and asked them to share stories, and I think both times that I've kind of prodded and asked, I've been politely told no, they don't like to speak about it, especially the Nantinaq. And a lot of the reason for that is they think just to speak the name, just to say the word Nantinaq is basically to invite it to you or to call it to you. So they don't like to talk about it.
Yeah, I could understand that. I have done investigations and been part of investigations in some reservations, some Native American reservations, and it seems like the older generation just feels like they're asking for trouble when they start telling stories. It's kind of kept between them, but it seems a lot of the younger kids now, they're kind of coming out and telling people about this to the chagrin of their forefathers.
Yeah, we had actually stopped at Port Graham on our way to Port Chatham last time, and with the film crew from the Travel Channel, and we were hoping to speak with some of the residents there. Some of the people that fled Port Chatham moved to Port Graham. It's actually not very far away. And we got there, we were kind of unannounced, and we showed up in town, and we asked a couple of people, hey, we want to talk about Bigfoot and Nantinaq, can you tell us some stories? And a gentleman finally showed up in a pickup truck, said, I'll go talk to the tribal chief, and be back with you. And he showed up a few minutes later, and I guess they'd had a village elder die the night before, or very recently anyway. And he said, yeah, the chief says no stories today. So we didn't get to talk with anybody. It was kind of disappointing.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if any of the relatives of the people that lived in Port Lock and Port Chatham had kind of come forward with any information.
There's a lady that lives in Nanwalek. It's a village across from Port Graham, basically, and she was actually born in Port Chatham in the 30s. Yeah. And there's a few interviews with her online, and I hope one of these days to be able to interview her myself. She's actually, I need to get on it because she's getting on up there in years. But there's a few YouTube videos. I don't have her name available right in front of me, but if you just, search for Nanwalek Elder or Nantinaq, you should be able to find it. But there's a few people that were actually born in Port Chatham that are still kicking around.
That would be a pretty interesting resource, especially since they probably been told stories while they were kids of some of the activity that did occur there. That's interesting. So do you investigate any other phenomena around Kenai?
Not actively, I don't go out and search of it. But if I hear about something or something pops up on my radar, I'll go check it out. There's a cemetery in the city of Kenai that's said to be haunted, and I went there a couple of Halloweens ago. Well, it wasn't on Halloween, but it was near Halloween, just to kick around, and took an audio recorder and tried to get some EVPs, and I didn't get any EVPs, but oddly enough, right in the middle of my little exploration there, my recorder just up and died on me with fresh batteries. So that was kind of weird.
I did an investigation several years ago. I wasn't in Alaska, but I did a series of interviews with a couple of people that lived in it was further north up the coast from Kenai. It was and I forget the name of the village, but they were right on the shoreline. And some of the phenomena that occurred there was just really weird. I mean, it was to the point that they were calling it a Leviathan type creature that would come out at night. They were telling me about them going out, on the snow on snowmobiles at night, and this thing be chasing them all over the place. Now,
yeah.
Have you heard anything similar to that before?
I've heard of Bigfoot type creatures chasing snow machines. Yeah. I've heard of Bigfoot coming up to cabins and slapping the sides of cabins. Pretty typical Bigfoot behavior that you hear of in the lower 48.
Right.
The one thing that I kind of do think is lacking up here is we don't hear about a whole lot of tree knocks. I think there was one I thought I heard on Port Chatham, but I wasn't sure. But other than that, I've never heard a tree knock up here. I've heard them in Washington.
Right. I thought that was something that was interesting in the film as well, because you guys did a lot of tree knocking, and it's just something you don't hear about a lot of up in Alaska, as far as drawing Bigfoot.
Yeah, and I don't think I've kind of stopped doing it. I've taken it out of my little bag of tricks because if they don't do it, then what good's it going to do for me to do it?
Yeah. I mean, I guess there's two sides to that. I mean, I know there are some researchers that swear by it, but I'll be honest with you, I have never heard any tree knocking out in the field. I mean, the many years I've been out there, that's just something I never really heard myself. Heard a lot of roaring, a lot of screaming, and a lot of other things, but I've never heard anything actually banging on trees.
Yeah, I heard some really good tree knocks in Washington, but most of those were just, it wasn't in response to anything we did. It was just on its own. One technique that I want to employ up here that I just haven't quite had the guts to do yet, I'll be honest and tell you, I haven't had the guts to do it, is I want to play a baby crying.
Oh.
Yeah.
Do you think it would attract them possibly?
Yeah, I think so. I would hope so, but that's something I want to do, but I don't want to do it where I'm in a position where I can't get away, if I can't make a retreat. I don't want to go set out in the middle of the woods by myself and do it, with no means of escape. I
agree with you. I can agree with that. Have you ever done any gifting, or I hear a lot of stories about gifting and such, but have you ever done anything like that, laid something out and maybe noticed that it was taken or something was left behind? Have you ever noticed any activity like that?
No, and of course, Port Chatham, my time there is so limited. I don't really, I haven't really had a chance to try that there yet. Yeah. But some of the other areas I've tried or researched in, I haven't done that. I haven't gifted anything. But of course, we have a lot of other animals here that I think could be, rodents and squirrels and stuff. So I have if something for gifting to work for me, I would have to get something back. So if I put something down and it's gone, then I'd have to have video of the Bigfoot taking it before I would think it was involved with Bigfoot.
Now, you had mentioned something before the show to me in reference to the film. that didn't make it on the film was that you found like abandoned TVs and other equipment and stuff at a certain area.
Yeah, it wasn't too long after we first got ashore, and we were walking along the ridge line there up above, on the cliffs, headed towards the town site, and we kind of found this clearing with I don't recall there being any actual TVs, but it was like the backs of TVs and it was junk, just junk, like the back of old TVs, some old stereo, like pieces of stereo and stuff, and it was all just kind of piled in this one little area. And we came up on it. We thought it was odd, but we didn't really. We're just like, oh, look at all this junk. This is weird. And we took a picture of it and we moved on. Well, then, hindsight 2020, I got to thinking about it and I was like, how did that crap get there and why is it there? Because it wasn't like it was on the shoreline where it could get washed in by the tide. This was way up on a cliff.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all bunched together, all tied, like in one area. And the more I think about it, the more I think something put it there.
Yeah, it does seem that way. I told you I've heard of so many stories of people finding, that would be in a camping spot and something would be taken and they'd go looking around and find a whole pile of all kinds of different stuff that it seemed like it was something other than a human doing it. And I think that may be what's going on.
Yeah, I have heard that bears will, they like plastic or they'll chew on plastic. And I want to throw in that I didn't see any chewing or any marks on any of the stuff that we found.
Right. Oh, a bear can get into a house and just chew it all to hell. I mean, it's pretty amazing the damage they can do. I've seen them get into cars and just literally destroy the whole car. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, a few years ago, I had a coworker who his son left some discarded McDonald's bags in his truck, and a bear come into his yard and just scratched his new truck all to pieces.
Oh my!
And it's a pretty funny story because he calls his insurance company. Of course, they're in the lower 48, and he's telling the lady, this bear, scratched my truck up, and the lady didn't believe him. He had to send them pictures.
What's the nearest settlement? What's the nearest settlement to Port Chatham or to Port Lock?
It would be Port Graham.
Okay.
And you gotta get a boat, take a boat to get there. There's no road that connects Port Chatham with any place.
Wow, it must really be thick beyond Port Chatham. I mean, it must. I don't know how far back you guys went into that area, but it must be unbelievably thick.
Yeah, I've never seen anything like it. I grew up running around in the woods in Kentucky, and I thought I knew my way around woods till I got to Port Chatham, and I've never seen anything like it. It is just it's just a workout just to go 15, 20 feet usually. So
wow, yeah. I mean, if you watch the film, and I encourage everybody to get it, and you can get it on Amazon Prime, and just rent it. It's very interesting. Like you said, the terrain itself is what really impressed me. I don't think I have ever seen moss that thick in one area. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, and it's a relatively, I think it's like $4 or $5 to rent the movie, and it's worlds cheaper than to rent it and get a look at the place than it is to actually get up here.
Yeah, it is. It's fascinating, and of course it was hands-on investigation as well. It wasn't like your typical documentary where you got something flying over and just taking pictures. But I think for all any criticism aside, I think it was very interesting, and I'd like for other people to see the FLIR and to see that and get their own impression, because I tell you, it's probably the best one I've ever seen.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'm really proud of with the documentary, with the Port Chatham show there, is that there wasn't a lot of nothing staged. If it's on the screen, it really happened. There were a couple of times where, maybe the cameraman didn't get this or didn't get that, so we'd have to repeat some things. But pretty much everything that you see is 100% real. It's not, there's no script. It's not staged. It's a real documentary. It's a real, it's being filmed as it's happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good for that. It really is. Let me ask you one more thing. What's the biggest halibut they caught off the boat?
For the documentary there?
Yeah, I know they were fishing, but it was kind of interesting. They were kind of getting maybe 1 foot, half a foot and a half size halibuts. I wonder if they were hooked into a decent size one.
No, because they were fishing in Port Chatham there in the bay.
Okay.
I think they might have got one that was 8 or 9 pounds. I think they got one that was big enough to eat. But if you want to catch the big ones, you got to go out into the deep water.
Yeah, that's been a dream of mine to go up there and go fishing. I love fly fishing, and that'd be great. I mean, I just have a ball up there. So, Beans, I want to thank you for coming on the show. And before you go, how can people get in touch with you?
Well, they can find me on Facebook. They can go to the Kenai Bigfoot Research Group and like that page. They can shoot me an email at kenaibigfoot@gmail.com. And they can send me a friend request on Facebook at Larry Beans Baxter. And send me your Alaska encounters. If you know somebody that had an encounter up here, or you've had an encounter up here, let me know, because I'd like to check it out.
Yeah, I got a few I may send you. I'd like to see what you say about them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, Beans, thanks again for being on the show, and hope to have you back sometime soon. All
right, Lon, thank you.
You take care now.
You too.
Now, if you've had an unexplained encounter or sighting, feel free to contact me through the Phantoms of Monsters blog site. My books are available on Amazon.com. Just search my name, Lon Strickler, and all my titles will appear. I want to again thank Larry Beans Baxter for joining me this evening, and I want to thank you for listening to the show. Good night, and have a safe and enjoyable weekend.